Alright, it's super dark today, super bad weather, so just bear with me in almost complete darkness. Dolby Atmos keeps taking the world step by step, and even though metal and Dolby Atmos are still finding their ways together, it's no doubt that cinematic scoring and film scoring is one of the best avenues for Atmos format. In this video, I want to take you on a journey with me. You will envision an example of Dolby Atmos mix done by my good friend Dan Bucknell from Stampede Studios, and then we'll walk through the production and discuss each element. Why was it constructed, how was it constructed, and what were the placements of Dolby Atmos in mind when doing so. So, let's get onto it. I'm Dr. Mike Trubetskov, mad scientist of metal, and I'm here to bring valuable information regarding modern metal production, mixing, and Dolby Atmos film scoring as well. So mate, please like and subscribe to my channel to not miss it out. Let's go. So after doing a few film scoring compositions for Atmos format specifically, I can say that the key difference between just creating a stereo production and a stereo mix for your film versus Dolby Atmos is creating elements with key placements in mind. Specifically, the main concept is in stereo mix, you obviously only have so much space, your left and right, and you're limited to how many synth elements, how many orchestral elements, how many percussive elements you can execute to not saturate the mix and to not let the others sink in the mud and disappear. And that's incredibly important because you want your melody to be clear and upfront, you want clarity, and you want depth and space. So mud is not something that you can ever allow. Therefore, you wouldn't create a stack of layers just for the sake of it. For Dolby Atmos, however, I find that the amount of layers that you need to execute at least doubles, so that you can fully utilize your front and rear speakers and fill in the room with the sounds, and not just by using the same sound, but sounds that complement each other and somehow tonally enhance one or the other element. You also may want to utilize your top and height in general in your Atmos mix and create elements specifically designed as objects for them to move around, to be automated, and to create a sense of movement, three-dimensional movement. So now let's go through this production together and see what we can extract from these created elements and how they were placed in the Atmos mix and how many were created in the first place. All right, so here we are, and let's just walk through the session with me just quickly here. So we got 5 main elements, and these are percussion, orchestral drums, bass, which is a synth bass, my prophet, guitars, symphonic elements, primarily symphonic destruction, and synths, again, mainly my prophet. And so here is one of the key differences that I find very much applicable for any one of you working with Atmos versus stereo. So for percussion, for instance, and for other primary layers, you cannot just have a stereo pair going at the same time and hope for that to fill in the whole Atmos space. I find that at least 2 stereo pairs, as in here or here, are necessary in order to make these elements sound full. Yet another approach is to create instruments in threes and thinking of their placement as a triangle. Imagine your stereo field and you have your main line sitting somewhere up at the front and then the others sitting somewhere at the rear, creating a triangular shape, which to me nicely fills in the Atmos space and kind of creates a cool contrast for the listener. And so in this instance, you could try doing such with your main melody line and then enhancing it additionally with some textured elements. Let's start breaking down each element individually here and seeing what we can learn from it. Starting off with the percussion. You can hear that these elements are incredibly squashed, and this is damage to percussion. To me, it sounds very epic and cinematic and just high quality. But one of the important considerations is you don't just create the same percussive line with the same tone or with the same rhythmic line. I recommend you to try playing around with them both so that they complement each other. In this instance, my toms are kind of more sparse, and then the damage percussion rhymes with it, filling in the blankets as well. But therefore, you can place those toms maybe up the rear, and so that they fill in the gap and create a more complementary feel to this element. You can also make those pairs, let's call them pairs, darker or brighter, and think about whether they go front or rear or maybe higher or maybe lower in your Atmos mix. Moving on. So you can hear that the core skeleton of the percussion remains consistent. Then there are some other elements added on top, and these are damaged kick and snare. They have a lot of sustain, and again, they breathe more, similarly to how those toms in the intro were working, with that same concept in mind. You can also add a specific reverb tail, reverb shots, and think about their stereo placement as well. Maybe you would like them to be a bit more narrow and kinda surround the listener, which is also possible to do. And for the culmination, you can also add kick and snare that would sit in the center, up the front, and again, create that triangular dynamics for your listener. Let's consider bass. So in this instance, I did not come up with anything significantly different from your stereo approach. You can see that it is a synth bass, some plugins applied and layered with those plugins, but it's the same part and it doesn't differ, and it's basically a mono bass summed into a stereo file, which is likely to be placed somewhere in the center, front speaker, or maybe a bit closer to the listener in the immersive experience. But in this particular production, bass isn't specifically important for any other reason rather than feeling that low end and sub end and just feeling it as a blanket. Let's get to the very important stuff, that is symphonic and synth elements. Let's start indeed with the main synth line. You can hear that it's a phase melting distorted synth executed this way on purpose, and it's a separate performance of 3 individual takes. Similarly to how double-tracked, triple-tracked guitars are executed, this synth was created with this same purpose. And as I mentioned before, the idea was to place it in a triangular shape. However, let's now see which other elements would support this main line here. So we got this line here as well. Let's mute this main synth for now. Very beautiful. And this one too. And now the important bit here is that, again, these are separate performances of the same or similar line. This one here harmonizes with it, whereas this one doesn't, but it has a different tone. This first one sounds a little bit brighter and a little bit more silky, whereas other one is a bit lower and has that harmonizing taste to it. For the first synth that kinda goes throughout the whole track, it may be placed somewhere higher so that it travels around and creates a sense of depth and movement, yet it does not quite end here. When you create music, when you compose for film, when you compose any other music, the good approach is to consider each section separately with different sort of mood or different sort of feel, atmosphere or vibe, let's call it. If you do so, you may immediately enhance that different feeling or move it maybe to a more anxious territory, or maybe to a more soft territory, more dreamy landscape by introducing the according layers. So here, for instance, this layer is introduced. What does it do? So this is a warmer, dreamier sort of tone, which is a more of a harmony, but then it enhances and builds and just creates more tension. These layers here. The arpeggiating synths are clearly created to make that depth and sort of hypnotic, cathartic, explorative sort of openness message to that bigger part. Whereas that top layer here is a counterpoint melody in order to make that beat sound a bit more interesting as well. If we go through the orchestral elements now too, and consider them with the main melody in mind. So these strings and symphonic elements are designed to, firstly, create a more symphonic feel, fill in the blanks, create a more lively and warmer tone. But also, if we think about the triangular approach, if we have a triangle, the other parts of the circle, which Dolby Atmos represents, remain unfulfilled. So we can try using main elements as a triangle and then putting those extra strings at somewhere at the front, maybe with exploring size so that they sound bigger, and carve in that space with some glue, as well as at the back to complement the brighter tone of the synths with something that is a bit darker. Similar deal here, a harmonizing layer, and now at the culmination part we have some tubes as well. Which somewhat mirror the guitars. let's get to the elephant in the room here, the low-tuned drop E guitars. You can see that the approach for these guitars is somewhat unorthodox. Firstly, they're very heavy, but they're not really up front and present. The goal was to create a feeling of a rumbling thunder somewhere at the back of the audio picture. Therefore, only 2 guitars were recorded, and then they were enhanced with this delay. They are quite wet and they have some reverb as well. Now, one of the ideas with such elements is to actually try sending them to a parallel bus with some very heavy saturation. You can then try that bus and pan it as well in the stereo field to fill in the blankets. So for instance, if your guitars go far at the back and maybe they kinda do not glue in the Atmos mix, you could try panning this stereo saturation bus a bit more forward, or maybe give it a bit more size so that it glues the stereo image together as well. And now let's go through the sections and kind of have a bit of a listen in isolation. You can hear that there are a lot of kind of weird and fun and vibrant layers going at the same time. Maybe in this production, as you know, I'm not a complete expert on Dolby Atmos as of yet. Maybe some are excessive, or maybe some could be added with a different feel, serve the melody a bit more. One of my recent explorations was to add a more percussive, shorter attack synthesizer for similar sustained elements as in this production here, in order to make it actually a bit more aggressive and add a bit more clarity to the main melody. I hope that I was able to inspire you and explain how you could utilize composing and creating specific layers with Dolby Atmos format in mind. Please like and subscribe and follow for more videos. And I'm always here to help. If you have any questions, let me know. And until next time, rock on and cheers.